We did do a first Les Cousins tribute show back in January, and at that show we introduced the concept of what we're now doing, and we're going to be doing more of these through the season. The idea is to pretend that we are in London in the late 60s in a club called Les Cousins, and to sort of set the scene we'll make various references to London and music and politics of what was going on at the time there. The name of the club, Les Cousins, often causes a few curious questions and some laughter. It was actually a Greek family had opened a French restaurant in London. I don't know why the Greeks had a French restaurant in England, but that's what they did. This was the 60s, anything was happening. And they called their restaurant Les Cuisines, which was the name of a fancy French movie in the late 50s. Now, my pronunciation of French is as bad tonight as it was back then. But nobody in England ever thought that this was a French name. Everybody called it Les Cousins. Everybody assumed it was run by somebody called Les and his cousins. So, you know, nobody cared. In fact, most of the musicians that went there and the people who went there regularly just called it the Cousins because that was even more elitist. I was lucky enough to be a teenager in London in those days and was able to get in. The reason that we could get in to the Les Cousins Club is an interesting aspect of the story of why Les Cousins became as significant and different as it was. Les Cousins didn't have a drinks licence. There was no alcohol. So as a 16, 17-year-old, we could get in. We couldn't get to the other folk clubs in and around London because, like a lot of folk music, it was associated with the pubs. It was either the upstairs room or the back room or, you know, whatever. So you couldn't go unless you were 18 plus. But if you were 16, 17, you could get into Les Cousins. The problem with the theory was that the artists that were going to play there, of course, they were old enough to drink. And they didn't want to get there early. They wanted to go to the pub. So the performers would go to the pubs around the corner and they wouldn't turn up at Les Cousins until fairly late at night. Could be 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, by which time they were drunk. We were fed up drinking coffee and sandwiches, all the other horrible stuff that they had in England cafes in those days. The next knock-on effect of this peculiar situation was that the last train in the 60s, the last train and the last bus out of London was about 11 or 11:30. So there was this sort of mad dash that if you were lucky, you might see somebody good for 15, 20 minutes and run off to the station. The other thing that happened was that Les Cousins then stayed open all night. And they had these very famous all-nighters. And this meant that they would have musicians that would turn up one after the other and play through the night. Now, some of those musicians were people like Donovan, Cat Stevens, Van Morrison, Al Stewart. It's an impressive list of young musicians that wanted to play in the London folk scene. And Les Cousins was the place to be. And they, just like a lot of magic, when it happens, it's a case of just having the right people in the right place at the right time. And that's what Les Cousins was. It was in the heart of London. It was in the Soho seedy district of London. There were a lot of jazz clubs around. There were a lot of strip joints around. And in fact, upstairs on the third floor above the restaurant, I heard stories that there were prostitutes, but I've no idea. I was 16, 17. I couldn't get a drink. I certainly couldn't get it. So Les Cousins had this story all to itself. I've been very lucky to have met with Diana Matthews, who was the lady that ran the club, along with her husband Andy. And really this story of Les Cousins is pretty much a love story between Diana and Andy. And all these different musicians that they met. And they lived in a flat just around the corner. And the musicians, when they'd finished their set, would often end up round at Diana and Andy's flat, and which they very cutely would refer to as tea parties. But these tea parties would go on all night, and I'm sure there was more than tea being consumed. There's a couple of famous stories. Paul Simon spent a lot of time in London in the mid-60s. In fact, he spent over a year there, wrote some of his most famous songs in London, and you're going to hear some of those later tonight. Paul Simon tells a couple of funny stories about going around to Diana's house for these tea parties. And there's actually a BBC documentary that you can find where Al Stewart is sitting there talking to Paul Simon, and Art Garfunkel is literally making the tea and serving tea. Poor old Art. I've got notes here which I'm going to refer back to every now and then, or else I should just sit here and talk all night. Okay, thank you. Okay. I guess the jokes about the eclipse are no longer relevant. There, that'll save half an hour. If you've been here before and came to any of the other shows, I'd like to say thank you for coming back. There were some people here last night. I think there were some people here tonight that had come here before in the January show, which was really nice. I also want to thank Matt Large, who helped me to put together this show. And more than just promoting the show, he also... hi, Marilee. Hi. Hi, Art. I know everybody. And of course, Martha, Wainwright and Nico that have encouraged me to put on the show. Martha is also only one degree of separation from the story. I can't categorically tell you that Loudon Wainwright played at Les Cousins. I can pretty much assure you that he did go to Les Cousins. I can also tell you that David Bowie went to Les Cousins and Jimi Hendrix went to Les Cousins. If you were in London in these days, you wanted to go to this club. James Taylor, I mean, the list is endless. There is, at the front counter, a CD box set, which has just been put together by an English record company. The company is called Cherry Red, and they kindly helped sponsor this evening with me when they heard what I was doing. And they shipped over the 3D box set, the 3 CD box set. They did not ship it over for free, and it is a very expensive piece with the taxes and the duty and everything else. It comes in at $50. Even if you don't buy it, stop and have a look at it, because it's a beautiful piece, and have a look at the artists on the back, and you'll see some familiar names along the lines that I've just given you. That was the Tea Party card. I've done that. We're going to pretend we're in London in the 60s, so if anybody's got to catch that last bus or train home, you better be on your way. When we did the first of these 3 shows, we concentrated on the guys that were there at the very beginning. People called Burt Yanks, John Renbourn, Whiz Jones. These were the guys that had started this shift in folk music. And if you look it up on Wikipedia, it's called Folk Baroque. And what was happening was that they were taking very old traditional, old English folk songs, sometimes 200-300 years old. They were updating them, rearranging them, and bringing in strings and Baroque flavours into the music. Now, the old school of folk guitarists, like a lot of purists in any business, were not particularly pleased with this bastardisation of their music. But of course, as with all music, it needed to develop and progress. And so you will hear reference to Baroque folk. And 2 of the artists that were most famous for starting that were the 2 artists that we're going to feature tonight, which is Roy Harper. Oh. Well, that hasn't happened before. Do you want to come up here and tell us a bit about Roy Harper? Oh, okay. Roy Harper and Nick Drake. Why these 2? Roy Harper is alive and kicking, living in a farm somewhere in Ireland. He's 82 years old. They've just published a book of his life. He, in his career, and he started when he was a young 16, 17-year-old, has put out 22 studio albums and a dozen live albums. He's recorded over 250 songs. And as I say, he's still alive and kicking, and put on a show just a few years ago, which was a sellout show in London. By contrast, Nick Drake died at the very tender age of 26. He only put out 3 albums, and while he was alive, he only put out 35 songs. He didn't put out any songs after he died, but they did. That got a real laugh last night. But they did discover, 10 other tracks that had been done in the studio, and they came out on what would then become his 4th album. But in his lifetime, he only recorded 3 albums. That entire discography of those 3 albums is less than 2 hours of music. and yet he's going to be mainly featured here tonight, even more so than Roy Harper. And my experience, certainly in North America, is when I mention these artists' name, with the possible exception of our Roy Harper friend here, most people say, yeah, I've heard of Nick Drake, which is incredible, given that he only made the 3 albums in 69, 71 and 72. I need to get a drink. I'm drying up here. Excuse me. This one's water. Right, okay. You can steal the other one. They could not have lived more different lifestyles. Roy Harper was very much of his day. He was very much the hippie, very much lived the life of sex, drugs and rock and roll, was very flamboyant, very loud, and went on to have quite an incredible career and a life. And we're going to talk about some of that after the next song. Nick Drake, by contrast, very quiet, very recluse, and very much the poet. And yet both of them shared a love for Delius, Sibelius, the poetry of Keats, and that all comes into their work. Both of them incorporate those poets and those musical influences. We'll talk more about Nick Drake when we get to the Nick Drake sets. I'm going to play a couple of Roy Harper songs. When you look at any of the articles about Roy Harper, even if you read about him in Wikipedia or if you interview people, as I've been lucky enough to interview people that worked with him, they always mention the fact that there was a very Bob Dylan influence in Roy Harper. Obviously, in the mid-60s, there were a lot of folk artists that all wanted to have that credit to say, well, they were influenced by or similar to Bob Dylan. But in Roy Harper's case, what everybody says, but he would write these very long songs, very complicated lyrical songs, and very obscure storylines. So he didn't write many traditional sort of love songs or folk songs, as you would expect. You'll be glad to know I'm not going to do the long, complicated versions of his songs. There's 2 reasons for that. Actually, there's only 1 reason for that. I can never remember all the lyrics. So we'll do this one song, then I'll tell you a few more stories, and then we'll do a second song of Roy Harper, and then we will introduce the Nick Drake section as well. This song...
Is your guitar plugged in?
Oh, where is she? She did this to me last night. There. You're supposed to do this. Thank you. Is that working for you there, Emily? Thank you. This is a song of a conversation between Jesus and Judas Iscariot. Yeah, sounds like Dylan, doesn't it? He was a man's best friend. He was the only man I knew. Been a too long harvest, and he turned us all on too. But my lips are sealed by history, and my tale I cannot tell. But my name is a Judas Iscariot, and my home address is hell. My home address is hell. Baby, don't you grieve after me, no, 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 don't you grieve after me. Baby, don't you grieve after me, no, 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 don't you grieve after me. Now it was 2 hours gone midnight when he called me to his side. He said, hey Jude, I need you, boy, I need you to take a ride. You gotta tell those folks downtown that their time is long overdue. But wait a minute, Jude, don't stick around, 'cause nobody's gonna love you. I said nobody's gonna dig you. Baby, don't you grieve after me, no, 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 don't you grieve after me. Baby, don't you grieve after me, no, 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 don't you grieve after me. Now you got all the silver and no forgiveness in your heart. I got 20 feet of rope to spare just where your guessing game starts. I got endless books to write in my tale I cannot tell. But the only way you'll find me is if you're living in the same hell. If you're living in the same hell. And baby, don't you grieve after me, no, 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 don't you grieve after me. And baby, don't you grieve after me, no, 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 don't you grieve after me. And baby, don't you grieve me when I'm dead, don't you grieve me when I'm gone. Oh yeah. Thank you. I think Roy did 17 verses, but I just did 3. He did an album called Flat Baroque Berserk. On that album he had most of Jethro Tull's and Ian Anderson and Emerson Lake and Palmer were all playing on that first album. It was his third album, but it was his first significant album. And he had actually recorded his first ever album at Les Cousins back in '66. And that had been mastered and mixed at the Abbey Road studio before any of us heard the word Abbey Road, before the Beatles did their album there. But nevertheless, as a studio, it was still the place in London to go. So I think that's kind of quite neat that if you should ever come across a copy of that, Roy Harper live at Les Cousins, it's got recorded Les Cousins, mixed at Abbey Road studio. I think that's a nice credit to have on your CV. The comparisons with Dylan, as I say, I mentioned constantly, and there is some rivalry there. In as much as the... I thought somebody was coming to take me away for a minute. Can you sit down, madam, please? There's a show going on.
Grabbing seats.
Okay. Okay, she's taking the seat with her. But carry on, take your time, there's no rush. I mentioned about the fact that these songs were, a lot of songs were taking old English folk songs that were a few hundred years old and revamping them, redoing them. The most famous example of that would be the Scarborough Fair song, the Parsley, Sage, Rosemary and Thyme, that Paul Simon put on his Parsley, Sage, Rosemary and Thyme album. He's named it after the lyric from the Scarborough Fair. Bob Dylan had heard that song as well, and Paul Simon had recorded it using a variation, a style, a tribute which had been designed and created by an English folk singer called Martin Carthy. And wherever Martin Carthy went, people would want him to do this Scarborough Fair song. And it was his arrangement that Paul Simon used, and he didn't credit Martin Carthy for it, which caused a bit of a rift. But more than that, there was a rift generally amongst the sort of elitist English folk players that were kind of a little peeved that these American folk singers were coming over to London. There was Tom Paxton, James Taylor, Jackson C. Frank, Paul Simon, Bob Dylan. And they were kind of finding all these great old English folk songs and taking them back to America, changing them around a little bit, sticking their names on it and putting them out. And Roy Harper is you can see him in an interview where he kind of says, you know, a lot of us were pissed off that these Americans could come over here and do this and get away with it. And you couldn't get away with it in England because people knew the songs. They knew where they were from. That was Roy Harper when he was a little bit younger and a little bit more angry. He then gets invited to do a Bob Dylan tribute show about 15 years ago. And he takes the opportunity then to maybe apologise for his naive, rough edges at the time, acknowledging that people were always stealing each other's music. It's part of the musical tradition anyway, and the evolution of music is done like that. And so he does a very nice tribute to Bob Dylan, but I think his tribute is a little tongue-in-cheek because he does a song called Girl from the North Country, which is credited to Bob Dylan. But the lyric of Girl from the North Country is ripped off from Scarborough Fair. And it's the same lyric. So both Dylan and Paul Simon were enjoying this, and there are lots, and we're going to come back to that a little bit later. I think we can move through most of this. Last thing about Roy Harper, and I'll do one more Roy Harper song and we'll move on. If I haven't already grabbed your attention, or at least tweaked your interest on Roy Harper, very quickly, if you are a Led Zeppelin fan, you probably have got or have at least listened to Led Zeppelin 3. What may well have passed your attention is that on the Led Zeppelin 3 album, Led Zeppelin actually have got a song called Hats Off to Roy Harper. And you kind of think, well, why on earth would Led Zeppelin want to do that? And I think it's credit to their relationship with Roy Harper. Pink Floyd put out an album called Wish You Were Here. On that album, there is a song called Have a Cigar. The singer of that song is Roy Harper. It's not Pink Floyd. So Pink Floyd invite Roy Harper into the studio to sing this song for them. If you look closely at some of the credits on the Roy Harper albums, you'll see Paul and Linda McCartney doing backing vocals. So, you know, the guy had some pull. When he appeared live on stage, I was lucky enough to see him once at a big venue in London. By now he'd become quite famous. His band for the evening, he had Keith Moon on drums. He had David Gilmour from Floyd on lead guitar, and he had John Paul Jones from Zeppelin on bass guitar, and he had somebody from the Faces on rhythm guitar. This was his backup band for the evening. And they're all playing Roy Harper songs, and he's up front doing his thing. So, an interesting guy. You have to listen to his albums. The one to listen to, if you're really interested, is called Stormcock. I know what you're thinking, but Stormcock is a weather bird in England. If you see the Stormcock, you know the weather's going to change. At least that's what I learned. Roy Harper also got to play with Joni Mitchell, and he got to play with Nick Drake. So he's been around. I'm going to do one last Roy Harper song. It's more in keeping with Roy Harper's love songs. But in typical Roy Harper fashion, you've got to remember this was the 60s. No use pretending, girl, you were for spending the rest of your days round my neck. My life isn't long and my love isn't strong and my love isn't something to wreck. Wish we could share, but you'll never be there. You'll be having those kids with one man. Milk his frustration and get a submission, and weep and wear black when he's gone. But I'll see you again by accident, or maybe I'll see you again. I'm feeling the reasons for why I left, like mountains between now and then. I wanted to help, but I couldn't stay, and I flew. What else could I do? I needed to stop you from falling in love that way. I just didn't have it for you. I left you stony, with dreams cold and bony. I know how it feels, I've been there. I was your only, your fault, you're so lonely, a face with a permanent stare. All I was wanting was friends and good hunting, but you want my soul behind bars. But love isn't jealous or bitchy and callous. It's here for us all, and it's gone. But I'll see you again by accident, or maybe I'll see you again. I'm feeling the reasons for why I left, like mountains between now and then. I wanted to help, but I couldn't stay, and I flew. What else could I do? I needed to stop you from falling in love that way. I just didn't have it for you. Thank you, thank you. Okay, I'm going to invite Lamala Duo to come up on stage and get set up, and I'll carry on talking anyway. Lamala Duo, a little bit confusing because there's actually 4 of them. They sprung that on me at the last minute, so they were already billed. But we had this opportunity arose. Let me tell you a little bit about Lamala. It's the name of a guitar luthier store just around the corner on Bernard. It opened here just at the end of last year in October, and Antonini and David run the store. I'd gone in to say hello, and we started talking, and they knew the songs of Nick Drake and they knew the songs of Roy Harper, so of course we immediately became great buddies, and I bored them until it was time to kick me out, which they did. Then when we were putting this together, I invited them to come and play, and they played in January. They do an instrumental set, there's no lyrics, and some of the songs that they're going to perform will actually get performed a little bit later tonight on piano with lyrics, but their interpretations musically are just beautiful. Then, much to my surprise, just about a week ago, they said that they were going to bring 2 violins along to add to the string arrangements. And this was what Nick Drake was famous for having done. When he was composing music, he composed not just the guitar and the vocal that he performed himself, but in his head he performed simultaneously, composed the lyric, the arrangement, the string arrangements. And so it's a big part of his music, and we're going to talk more about that in between the other sets. Most of the other songs you're going to hear tonight, certainly from Lamala and from the next act, will be Nick Drake songs. So, I don't know, how close are we to being ready, boys and girls? I'm going to go there. They're going to move me. You're on? Yeah. Okay, I get 2 mics. I'll start again then. Oh, look at this, all my garbage. I'll move all that in just a minute. Okay, so they're going to set the stage up for the string arrangements. Nick Drake, 19 years old when he writes these first songs that you're going to hear, had no previous connections to the record industry, had done some music at university, but this was pretty much a surprise to his family when he produces this album. 69 in England, singer-songwriter with a guitar. Every other person in England was a singer-songwriter with a guitar. So what chance did Nick Drake have? But when the guys in the studio heard him, without exception, everybody felt and acknowledged that Nick Drake was a genius. And the guys in the studio, the guys in the record company, don't throw that kind of word around loosely. Most of the musicians that worked with him also agreed he was a genius. He would sit and do 1 take, vocal and guitar at the same time, always in perfect tune. He always knew exactly which bar to pick it up if they needed to go back to rework it. And if they needed to go back to rework a song, it wasn't because Nick Drake needed to do it, it was because the bass player or the string arrangements weren't quite right. And apparently Nick could always just drop straight in at bar 37 and just pick it up identical to where he left it off. They did a lot of classical arrangements with their strings. Their producer in the recording studio brought in some top orchestra arrangers and leaders, but that wasn't good enough for Nick. He did his own. So I think the first one, I'm going to leave Dave to introduce. You've got a mic there, Dave? No, probably not.
Yes.
Oh, good. So Dave's going to talk. Thank you.
Allô, bonjour,
This is
bonjour.
Lamala. Give them a round of applause.
Merci.
Bonsoir, bonsoir tout le monde. Alors, comme Guy nous a présenté, nous sommes...
Excuse me, sorry.
No worries. Nous sommes non,
Yeah, I'll take it. Yeah, sorry. A great business plan. Okay, I got it. I'm going to unplug. Oh, sorry, Emily.
all good. Ça va les oreilles. Donc c'est ça. Comme Guy nous a présenté, on est non seulement un duo en guitare, mais aussi des partenaires de business.
Excuse me.
Sorry, it's all right.
Very unprofessional. It's my show, so that doesn't matter.
Donc c'est ça, au premier concert que Guy avait organisé, on avait fait juste des chansons, nous deux ensemble, puis David est arrivé avec l'idée de faire une des chansons d'un autre album de Nick Drake qui s'appelle Riverman. Puis en écoutant évidemment la chanson, on a entendu qu'il y avait un super bel arrangement de cordes. Donc on s'est dit, bon, ben, pourquoi pas inviter nos deux amoureuses qui sont des super bonnes violonistes. Alors pour compléter justement notre petit duo, on va être un quatuor ce soir. Donc on va commencer juste une chanson nous deux.
C'est Things Behind the Sun.
Sur
Comme hier, mais en arrière du soleil à plat.
C'est ça. Merci beaucoup. Merci, merci. Non, prochaine tour.
Pendant que les filles s'installent, je vais improviser sur une des pièces de Nick Drake que j'aime beaucoup qui s'appelle No.
No.
Merci.
Je veux juste souligner que c'était de l'improvisation. Il a pas du tout pratiqué ça. Non, pas de vrai, c'est pas une blague, c'est...
Je pratique pas.
Non, il n'y a plus besoin de pratiquer, je pense, rendu là.
Oui.
Je vais vous présenter Maude Fréchette à l'alto et Marie-Édith Racine au violon. Merci. Alors voici Riverman. Merci, merci. On est chanceux de les avoir, hein. Bon, on va changer de guitare.
La prochaine guitare est à vendre. Dans notre magasin de musique, L'Homme à la guitare.
Yes.
On fait de la réparation de guitare, moi puis Antonin, puis on vend aussi des vieux instruments restaurés. Puis ça, c'est une Gibson J45 de 1949.
C'est une très vieille guitare. On a restauré, ça nous a pris à peu près 30 heures à restaurer. 30 heures, pas 30 ans, 30 heures. J'ai pas encore 30 ans, alors ça se peut pas.
Eux, ils sont pas là pour l'amour de la musique, ils sont juste
Non.
là pour vendre.
Ça va. On va faire les enchères après, là.
Acheter nos billets.
Ouais, la merch, le mal à la guitare. Mais ceci étant dit, c'est quand même pas l'instrument le plus vieux sur la scène ce soir.
Oui, c'est vrai.
C'est vrai, le violon de Marie-Édith, il est pas à vendre, non?
C'est vraiment à savoir comme histoire.
Ouais, c'est quand même le fun. C'est un violon qui date de 1720. Alors, c'est quand même fou quand on y pense que...
S'il y en a qui connaissent les jardins de Métis à Rimouski, c'est le violon, ben c'est connu là, c'est le violon de la fondatrice,
De Elsie Réforme.
la fondatrice des jardins de Métis qui a été restaurée. Marie-Édith, comme elle vient de Rimouski, elle a hérité de ce prêt, alors
Pendant 3
toujours
ans.
intéressant.
Donc,
C'est ça.
voilà, alors il y a des vieux instruments et des modernes.
Ben moi c'est un alto cheap, là, fait que il n'y a pas d'histoire.
Lui, il est à vendre.
Non, absolument pas.
Non plus.
Fait qu'on termine avec la pièce Parasite de Nick Drake.
Juste à m'accorder vite. Oh, ça doit être correct. Ça va être good. On fait ça un. Ok. C'est une tune. Là, j'ai les mains frettes. Ready? Merci beaucoup. Merci. David, Maud, Marie-Édith et moi-même Antonin. Merci. Passez une bonne soirée.
Okay, I don't think you clapped enough for that. I think you got to do that again. When I first mentioned to Matt Large, the co-presenter of the show tonight, that I wanted to do a Nick Drake tribute evening, he kind of whistled through his teeth and said, "Boy, guy," he said, "you're going to have difficulty finding people that can play Nick Drake songs." But I think we proved tonight that we can do that. And I think also what you heard there was a fantastic fusion of a lot of jazz riffs that were put into these folk songs with Baroque classical expression. Beautifully done. The next artist, Emmett, we got introduced because of Nick Drake. I was looking for musicians that could do this, and his name came up from a contact to a friend. I reached out, Emmett and I talked on the phone. He sent me a Facebook link, and I saw this performance and thought, yeah, we need to get this guy here tonight. So he's just going to tune up and get himself settled. It's quite something to stand up here alone on your own with an acoustic guitar. Not to take anything away from the duo that you just saw, but watch the style of Emmett's performance, not to make him feel any more nervous than he already is. He's going to do 3 songs for you this evening. I'll leave him to introduce them as they go along. How soon to ready are we? You still got your pyjamas on, Emmett? You're going to get dressed? You're going to get changed?
Well, I'd say I'm pretty close to ready.
Okay, great. Okay, he's not going to get changed, so.
Well, there's a little tidbit that Guy had told me, and it relates to the songs that I'll be playing tonight. It's off of the 5 Leaves Left album, and I didn't know that back in the 60s, and you're going to have to correct me here, but when you went and bought a pack of leaves for rolling paper, there would be the little card when you got to 5 leaves left, and this is what Nick Drake is referring to. But I've listened to this album a long time, and I always kind of imagined it as like the last 5 leaves of the tree before it's kind of completely gone barren into winter, and it really feels like the feeling that Nick Drake evokes in his music. It's melancholy, it's reminiscent of End, but simultaneously, it speaks to a greater whole. And so, this first tune, you folks have heard it tonight already, but I'll be giving a vocal rendition of something that has a lot of lyrical power. Riverman. Do we have a guitar signal? Just... Betty came by on her way, said she had a word to say about things today. falling leaves. Said she hadn't heard the news about the way, hadn't had the time to choose a way to lose what she believed. Gonna see the riverman, gonna tell him all I can about the plan for lilac time. If he tells me all he knows about the way his river flows, and all night shows in summertime. Betty said she prayed today for the sky to blow away, or maybe stay. She wasn't sure, for when she thought of summer rain calling for her mind again, she lost the pain and stayed for more. Gonna see the riverman, gonna tell him all I can about the band. I'm feeling free, for if he tells me all he knows about the way his river flows, I don't suppose it's meant for me. Come and go. Oh, how they come and go. All right, and this, thank you all so much. This next tune, Day is Done, I think really puts an emphasis on the Baroque part of the Baroque folk. So here's a lovely tune. When the day is done, down to earth then sinks the sun, along with everything lost in one. When the day is done, when the day is done, hope so much your race will be all one. Come to find you jumped the gun. Got to go back where you begun. When the day is done, when the night is cold, some get by and some get old, just to find life's not made of gold. When the night is cold, when the bird is flown, some get by and some get old, got no place to call your home. When the bird is flown, when the game's been fought, newspapers blowing across the court, lost much sooner than you would have thought. When the game's been fought, when the party's through, seems so very sad for you. Didn't do the things you meant to do. Now there's no time to start anew. When the party's through, when the day is done, down to earth then sinks the sun, along with everything lost in one. When the day is done, and so this next tune is an original. Tears well up in my eyes,
sometime. Though I can't say why I cry, I'll go back to before the pain dug its teeth deep within, holding on so tightly to some things I can't forgive. A past self for wasting what was such a precious gift. And now I see, I do believe what error I had made. Simply I forgot to start anew with each new day. 'Cause this life I live is for living, not to throw it all away. And this life we live is for living, not to let it drift away. Hopes and dreams may not yet be received, but the act of dreaming's not make-believe. I've come so far, but my eternal drive must be balanced by some stillness time. Holding on so tightly to some things I can't forgive. A past self for wasting what such a precious gift. And now I see, I do believe what error I had made. Simply I forgot to start anew with each new day. 'Cause this life I live is for living, not for letting drift away. And this life I live is for living, so why not begin today? Cause this life we live is for living, not for letting drift away. And this life we live is forgiven, so why not start with today?
Thank you all so much.
Fantastic, Emmett. Thank you very much. We're going to take a quick break. If you want to get a beer, there's also food available. I think there's still some food left. We're going to try and rush through that and get back here in 10, 15 minutes to get into the second half. Thank you very much.